Good morning, Cary.
Good morning.
Thanks for agreeing to do this. You know what, I think I want to move these. Is that all right if we move these?
Yeah, well, glad we did that
File
last time. I
folders?
can scoot.
Yeah, sorry about
No,
that.
no, that's what I asked about. It's just,
I apologize.
can you lift
I
the
didn't-
back end of that one up?
You bet.
There we go. Okay. Whoa. Okay. Whoa.
There we go.
I don't know if I can get them all the way over. But I think
That's
I
it.
can try.
Yeah. There we go. That'll be good.
I'll just get on the other side of the table here. Next.
All right. And
I
then,
can move the papers too if you want.
no, that's okay. It was just probably like gonna make me look like I was a floating head on top of those
Oh, no. It's good. I'm okay looking like I'm.
file
floating, yeah,
folders.
so-
So now you just have to keep on your mark there.
Oh, okay.
See how close our knees are?
Yeah,
It is.
okay.
It does feel a little
Yeah.
unnaturally close. Like you don't usually sit this close in a meeting, right?
Right.
But on camera, we look like we're really far apart.
Okay.
So,
Good.
all right. Good morning, Cary.
Good morning.
Thank you for agreeing to do this, meet with me and talk with me about project procurement management. Can you just introduce yourself, say your name, what part of ASU what part of the organization you're in, and your like your tenure here?
So my name is Cary Stoneman. I'm a project manager with the Colleges of Engineering, working mostly with new researchers and new lab renovations, and I've been at ASU for 5 years.
Excellent. Thanks for agreeing to do this. The first area that I want to talk about a little bit is kind of in general the project procurement process, because obviously that's different in every organization, depending on the size of the organization, the kinds of projects that they are implementing, the maturity of the organization. Lots of different factors are going to go into that, like what that procurement process looks like from the project manager's perspective, because of course inside the procurement organization, you know, they have their own set of policies and rules and regulations and laws they have to comply with and stuff. But those of us like you and I from the project management side, like our view into that and how we engage and interact with them can be very different. So I would like to hear
Okay.
your kind of overall description of what that looks like for you.
So when we start a project, I meet with a researcher or group or department whoever we're doing the work for. And we determine in a programming phase what the scope of work is going to be. And then that particular scope of work is going to include purchasing or procurement of equipment or infrastructure items, some of which are going to have long lead times and some of which are not. And then on top of that, we will move into a process of design and engineering where those things will be specified. And then different groups underneath the contractual arrangements, whether it's from representing the owner, representing the contractor, or the research person or client, will make those purchases. And so as a project manager, I'm sort of an overseer of those processes along with the rest of the team. At the end of the day, the contractor will decide when he needs something, or the client will know that at the end of a substantial completion and they have to do their work, a certain tool needs to be delivered. And the owner also has the ability to buy outside of the contractual arrangement with the contractor in order to maybe procure something that's a 12 or 24-week lead time. So sometimes, for example, exhaust fans or cabinetry will have a 16 or 24-week lead time. Well, so we have the design team sit down and give us those items right away in what's called schematic design, early design, but enough that we know that's the furniture we're going to use. And then we can order that from the owner's side, and that happens in the purchasing office, and they procure that, and we try to get that set up so it'll be delivered while we're concurrent with design, concurrent with permitting, concurrent with pricing. So there's all these other things that are going to happen that might take 120 to 160 days, which by the time we're ready to go to construction, now we'll be having a delivery of items that we needed. Whereas if we were just starting at the time of construction, we've pushed the project out 4 to 6 months simply because of a long delivery time, not because the project needed that much construction time. And then on top of that, the contractor buys what they need. So we typically want the contractor to buy all of the things they have to warranty. So furniture doesn't need a big warranty, but mechanical systems, electrical systems, they need warranties. So the owner tends to not want to buy those things because at the end of the day, then the contractor doesn't want to install something that they didn't purchase. And then they don't want to warranty something that they didn't purchase. So it becomes sort of finger pointing if there's a problem. So to streamline it, we want the person who's going to be responsible for warranty and installation to purchase those items.
So can I take a step back and say, so the owner that you're referring to in this situation, who are the owners?
Oh, so in this situation, it's Arizona State University.
Okay, so the owner is, and then who, like, there's actually individuals who are representing that owner. Like there are, it sounded like there's decisions to be
Right.
made and whatnot, so that is, those are executive decision makers within the college that.
Right,
where you're
so
located.
here, I can be more specific. So I represent the research arm of for the College of Engineering, they've made a researcher hire, and I'm that person's ombudsman in the process.
Okay.
So that at the end of the day, they get what they need to perform the research. And then I'm I'm working as part of a team with Capital Project Management, who's managing the architecture, construction, and bond money if we're using it. So they're managing the project, and I'm their client. The researcher's my client. And then the contractor has Capital Projects as their client. The funding actually comes through me from the funds that are given to the colleges of engineering. And there's directors, and there's a lot of people involved in the puzzle here. And so we definitely have an entire team. And then Capital Projects will work with the purchasing people at ASU should they need to buy something. Then that goes through the purchasing department. Accounting is involved with the transfer of money. If I say, yeah, so Capital Projects says, hey, I need $1 million, and I go to my boss and I say, okay, we need $1 million. We transfer it to the accounting department. Accounting sets up all the accounts, and it goes to Capital Projects. And then if something needs to be purchased, Capital Projects then writes the PO back to the purchasing department if it goes through ASU, to the contractor if it goes to the contractor. And then the researcher has his own set of funds that he's buying his specific equipment that's not infrastructure. So let's say a scanning electron microscope. And so that may be a $500 or $1 million piece of equipment that the researcher's purchasing. And then I'm collaborating with that person on what does that tool need to operate. And then that becomes part of the project. That
Yep.
clear?
Yep. And so it sounds like this sounds like a very specialized kind of project management where the sort of classic or standard-ish looking project management, the capital
project,
right? Like those folks are experts at like buildings and infrastructure and things like that, but not specific to research projects.
Or laboratories.
Right, and so the project management that you're doing and the project management services that you provide within the College of Engineering is focused on that very specific realm of what engineering researchers need and how they need it. Because that individual, these are for new hires, that individual isn't even here yet, right? And so they can't possibly be advocating and communicating and negotiating and working with that capital projects management person in order to ensure that the laboratory that they need is.
Right, they're working with me before they get here, programming and laying out how they want their lab and how many people they're bringing, how many PhD students, postdocs, graduate students, what kind of deliverable they might have. So sometimes we do get people that are a full professor and they have a grant or some deliverable. It could be millions of dollars, and they say, look, I need to hit the ground running, and here's what I need, and can you provide that? And so right away we have a schedule issue, and we have a deliverable, and we know what kind of pressure there's going to be, if you will, on the project to make sure that that's done by that specific time.
Right.
Which may involve, do we buy something, does ASU buy it versus the contractor?
Right.
Because we can't, at the end of the day, we're collaborating as a team for that. So my researcher or the team or me are setting a date that we need to hit, and then the team is trying to see if that's possible and that can be hit. If not, then it's a matter of managing expectations, which is a big part of project management. It isn't just whatever someone tells you you do, it's you try to do it, but you have to manage the expectation, whether it's reasonable or unreasonable, given the criteria that's necessary, whether it's purchasing or long lead items or some type of equipment that in a building, maybe it needs a new roof, that building or something. And so there's a lot of things, there's a lot of pieces that have to be collaborated together.
Right, and it's everything's moving and changing. It isn't like the projects that the capital project,
CPMG, let's call it that.
CPMG.
Yeah.
What they're working on, because they're working on lots of different projects
Right.
for lots of different
Right.
constituent groups for the entire university.
Right.
Just
On
like
4 campuses.
Right, just like any large, corporation, like
Right.
if you were to take ASU and think about it, just take all its numbers, right? And say instead of being a public university, it was a for-profit organization, it would have this much complexity with it as well. And so
Right.
those folks are, achieving, they have organizational goals and long-term things that your projects are just one here and then one there, one here, one there, from their perspective, and it has to work in with all that complexity going on for
Correct.
them too.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, and then with law changes and then with, you were mentioning before we turned the camera on, a little bit about the environmental situation that exists now in terms of construction, and with the way that the economy fluctuates impacts the
Right.
availability of resources and what the prices of those resources are over time.
Correct.
Right?
Right, absolutely.
Yeah.
So in today's environment, prices have gone up. It takes a long time to get people to bid things because when they're bidding, they're not necessarily making money. Some of our projects might be small for an electrical contractor. Maybe it's only, $300,000, and he's bidding $3 to $5 million projects. So in that way, we end up trying to work with larger contractors that can package things so that they get people to come in and do work. And then the costs have gone way up. And so that's a whole budgeting issue. But for example, I recently had a project and everything was scheduled and running well, and we didn't get a delivery on time of a mechanical system. And that contractor said, okay, no problem, but I can't just come back next week. I'm 3 weeks out before I can come back. So a delivery of an item doesn't just put the project out a week, it puts it out 3 weeks.
Right.
And then that involves all the people downstream that have to now change their schedule.
Right.
And in a busy environment where labor is tight, that can really impact you a lot. So, both in time and money and schedule.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that was perfect. I think that wraps up our whole first
Okay, great.
segment. And just check your mark and make sure you're not shifting backwards. I was
Nope,
gonna go
I
like
think I'm
this.
good.
I was gonna go like this.
Oh.
Come forward. I think you just moved out of the screen.
I'm trying to.
All right. Okay, now we're gonna
All
start
right.
the next one.
Okay.
Good morning, Cary. Thank you for agreeing to do this with me. To start, would you just introduce yourself, say your name, your title, what you do here at ASU?
Sure, my name's Cary Stoneman, and I'm a project manager with the Colleges of Engineering. I've been at ASU about 5 years, and my primary role is to act as an ombudsman for the new researchers that we hire that come into ASU in creating or renovating a space for their research needs when they get here.
Perfect, excellent. So can you describe kind of when you're doing that, when you're acting as the ombudsman to create that research space that the new researcher needs, can you talk about kind of just the big picture framework of what you're dealing with from kind of a cost lens? Like, obviously, these projects, there's money involved, right? There's costs involved.
Yes.
But can you just kind of lay out what what that looks like from your perspective?
Well, that's a complicated question because it's a political question, and it's a question that has to do with the person that was hired, the departmental goals, the area of expertise that they're bringing into ASU, and all of those elements that might be needed for their research have different cost impacts. So somebody that's a computer person, engineering has 6 different schools: mechanical engineering, chemical engineering, civil engineering. There's a lot of different schools, so each of those has different needs. So somebody that's coming in that's doing computer work might need an office space, power, and data, and it's very inexpensive. It might not even need a renovation. It might just be able to put them in a space, or maybe carpet and paint. Somebody that's coming in building carbon nanotubes or some new kind of chip for computers might need all sorts of specialty gases that are flammable, new sprinkler systems, lots and lots of power, different kinds of exhaust systems, fume hoods, chemical vapor deposition exhaust, and that might be $1 million or $2 million. So it's not always easy to know when I meet somebody what I'm getting, because when a person's introduced to me, it isn't that information hasn't been presented.
Right, it's not on their CV.
No.
Right, like all of these,
No.
right, like you can't tell readily what.
Not necessarily. Now I'm getting good at it because I usually go and look up their research and read it, but the department, when they hand it down, doesn't necessarily say anything. They say, oh, we're hiring this mechanical engineer, figure out what they need and find a space for them, and let's start. So
I just want to kind of
Please,
wrap around
yeah.
that. Like, that's how vague it is to start? Like,
yes.
Like, just give them what they need?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
All
I mean,
right.
they probably, they're not all that way. Sometimes when they're hired, they do have a CV, and there are some preliminary paperwork that they might have filled out, what kind of lab they want, how many square feet, how many PhD students, postdocs, grad students they anticipate, do they have any current research they're bringing with them, or is there any specific equipment that they're bringing with them, do they need low vibration, are they doing nanotechnology? I mean, there's a lot of parameters here that I sometimes get. But typically, we're recruiting a person for their knowledge and their either some new area that they developed as a PhD student and now they're ready to go to work, or somebody who's an existing professor, associate professor, that brings a body of work that ASU is interested in proliferating and making part of the campus community here. But literally, when I first meet most of the associate professors, they say, well, I need an electrical engineering lab. So they're not used to building something custom. They've always worked in a certain kind of space. Mm-hmm. And so I have to start to draw out, what that means to them and what's their specific types of equipment they're going to use. Are they sharing things on campus with other existing facilities? Do they need their own facility? I mean, there's a lot of complications here that have to be drawn out in what we call programming, which is the initial startup and information necessary to hand off and decide where they're going to go, how many square feet they need, and what kind of monetary cost implication that's going to have.
So is that what you're referring to as programming? Is that like requirements analysis? Could you?
Yeah, I would say that's right. Yeah,
Okay.
Programming is basically you're putting together a package to hand off to design professional, and in the dean's office and in the deciding about what space we have available, either working with the individual engineering department or university-wide. We may or may not have existing space that we have in engineering. We may have to go back to the university planner and say, hey, we need more space. And so the programming is the developing of all of the criteria necessary to get this person at ASU and working in an environment that they can be productive based on what they were hired to do.
And then there's costs associated with that, like whether or not new stuff has to be purchased or
Right,
new
exactly.
space has to be
Right.
created or.
Correct. Well, we have a lot of space here, but some of it's old space. Some of our buildings are 1950s, and so when we bring somebody in, we have to bring everything up to code once we touch it. And so that often means a lot of cost. Some of that cost is infrastructure cost. that I would call deferred maintenance. We've got a 20-year-old air conditioner, or 30-year-old, or however old, and this person's gonna need a lot of air, so we're gonna replace that. Maybe we have a roof that needs to be patched or re-roofed. Maybe we have electrical that is no longer to code and all new wire has to be pulled. There's lots of things that have to do with making the space current, ready, meeting ADA capabilities. So there's all different ADA laws now, and so we have to make sure that from the parking lot to the lab, we have met those criteria. That becomes part of the project. So it isn't just what they need, there's all of this other requirement necessary in order to get that space, typically, if it's an older space, up to speed.
No, that's fascinating.
Okay, yeah.
And so the cost, it doesn't sound like it's as straightforward, because it doesn't sound like the project boundaries are like really rigid walls that say, okay, like, because it sounds like some of the things you mentioned, depending on, it sounds like there's a lot of cost-benefit analysis decisions that are made. Like, if we're gonna put them in this building, which is this older 1950s building, then we have to do this to the AC, the air system and the electrical system and the making the building itself ADA compliant and whatnot. And that goes beyond, the scope of that is beyond just their lab space, right? It's
Right.
like larger than that. And so it sounds like the cost concerns that you need to attend to are much more like flexible.
Well, they're
not flexible, I mean, that's a
They
diffuse,
vary,
yeah,
yes,
okay.
that's right. They vary. So, I mean, the university has a target expense that they have, say, for an associate professor or a full professor, where there is an expense that they would like to hit. But in my experience, that has not been, it has more to do with where we're putting somebody and what kind of specific research needs they have than just a number. And so in the 120 some labs I've done in the last 5 years, it's been all over the place. You know, whether sometimes we go out to ground that doesn't have anything, and sometimes we're in a 1957 building, and sometimes we're in a brand new building, and they don't really need much. We just put them in there, and we do a little bit of this or that for their specific equipment. Maybe they need a high power or a specific kind of gas, hydrogen or something, and we just take care of that one thing.
Right.
And there's more of a movement now. So in addition to individual labs, the latest movement is to neighborhoods and collaborating and interdisciplinary. That's what ASU does, a lot of interdisciplinary. And so in that instance, we're looking to pre-build neighborhoods that have capacity for a certain kind of research, whether that's biological research or that's manufacturing. We have some clean rooms where they're shared resources, because it's a lot less expensive to have shared resources. So the old model was individual researchers, individual space, fully controlled by that person. And the new model is shared resource, shared grant writing, shared spaces for grad students, hoteling. As we've gotten larger at the university, we have less space because we're so big, that now we have to start becoming more efficient with that space. And this is happening all over the country, not just here.
Right.
And so that creates another bit of, I'm gonna call it conflict, because now maybe I have 3 researchers and they all want something a little different, and really that should be up to, that's a political issue that needs to be handled at the departmental level, how they, I always say I'm not the policy guy, I'm the get it done guy. And so I kind of want all that stuff worked out so that I just know what they need, how to get it built, because that's enough of a challenge, without also involving possibly, you wouldn't want to have a basketball team where you upset your 2 best players just because they didn't get along. That's the coach's problem, that's not the guy building the floor and making sure the nets are working or whatever. And so that, because of the change in thinking about individual labs to collaborative labs, that brings with it some other issues, different kinds of issues. And then part of the project manager's responsibility, I guess, is to not jump in where they shouldn't be. Sort of
Yes.
understand where their sweet spot is and where
Right.
other people's is.
Right.
Sometimes I'm a problem solver and I want to solve everything, but there's certain things I'm like, no, that's really not where I should be.
Right, right, because that's what you just described in there, like figuring out where those sweet spots are and achieving that kind of collaboration
Right.
within the research group. That's their challenge that can benefit the research that they're doing now and can do in the future. And that has to do with a lot of like the kind of environment that gets created, not just the tangible physical environment, but the work environment that's being created and the relationship environment that's being created. And that's obviously well beyond, where your responsibilities stop, is like what kinds of relationships are being fostered and